The ATB battle system. Once a cornerstone of the RPG genre, is slowly becoming a relic of the past. A lot of us, including myself, hold fond memories of this system. The system was introduced by Square Enix in 1991 when they released Final Fantasy IV, and since then, nearly every mainline Final Fantasy up till 13 used an iteration of this system. To put that into perspective, that's over 20 years that Square Enix used this for their flagship title. And Square Enix weren't the only kids playing in the sandbox. Games like Grandia have an interesting approach to an ATB-like system. The system has shown that it can work, but for at least the past 10 years, the use of ATB-like systems has drastically declined. Not just by Square Enix, but really any RPG studio. The indie game market is full to the brim of all kinds of RPGs, but rarely, if at all, do you see games that use time-based systems similar to ATB. The RPGs that release are usually action or turn-based. I myself spent several months working on an ATB-style battle system and recently started walking away from it after several rounds of playtesting. Active time battle systems may never return, or at least not how we remember them. To be on the same page, an ATB system is a subgenre of RPGs that use time to determine turn order. As time passes, the bar fills up, and whoever bar reaches the top first gets to perform an action. In most games that use this type of system, the enemy will not wait for you to decide on an action, pressuring players into making decisions quickly. On paper, this isn't a terrible idea, but one of the main appeals of RPG combat is the tactical and strategic gameplay. The RPG audience typically want deep and challenging combat systems, but the problem with ATB-style games is they try to be both turn-based and real-time. This ultimately provides a watered-down experience of both genres. Turn-based combat systems are typically known for thought-provoking encounters where you plan each turn to find the best option. But the more you push turn-based mechanics into real-time setting, the harder it is to add complexity to the game. Players find themselves just spamming the attack button and not really focused on the game's mechanics. This was even the case during the development of the grandfather of ATB, Final Fantasy IV, where the developers had to implement cast timers and artificial pauses to clean up the combat's readability. In fact, if you play any ATB FF game from the 90s, you'll notice that nothing happens simultaneously, but rather actions are queued up and happen in a sequence. That's very intentional. But here's the thing, if you start adding too many pauses to an ATB system, you'll find that you're better off just making a turn-based game because you can focus more on making interesting systems and allowing players to actually think, as opposed to trying to find a middle ground that doesn't really satisfy either group. The ATB games are too slow for real-time or action lovers, but not deep enough for turn-based enthusiasts. It's for these core design issues that I believe we don't see many traditional ATB-style games hit the market. It's hard to make them fun for either audience, especially in an age where no one likes waiting for bars to fill. But with all that said, I believe there are still ways to make ATB-style games deep, fun, and interesting. The core complaints of the original iterations of the system is that 1. They require you to sit around and wait for bars to fill, 2. The bar itself doesn't provide anything meaningful to combat, and 3. They don't really take advantage of either action or turn-based elements. The thing is, RPG developers have created a number of solutions for years now. Let's start back in 1997 with the release of a cult classic, Grandia. Grandia is a game that created a very interesting ATB-like system known as the initiative bar. You still need to wait for meter to fill, and turns are paused when you're inputting actions. But the difference is that the bar is split into two sections. The wait phase, which is your standard gauge fill time, and the action phase, which is the time that it takes to execute commands. What's most notable is that during the action phase, both players and enemies are vulnerable to having their actions interrupted, setting them back on the timeline. This opens up the combat system to really interesting choices. Now, before taking an action, you need to consider if you or the enemy can be interrupted, or if you should defend to avoid the damage. You can take this idea further by creating spells with long cast times that may require some protection from other party members, or you can play with the interrupt mechanic itself. Perhaps interrupted enemies enter a staggered state that allow you to do follow-up attacks. There are many things that can be done with Grandia's core systems just by adding a second half to the time bar. Jumping back on the Square Enix train, we'll talk about a somewhat underappreciated entry, Final Fantasy XII. Released in 2006, Final Fantasy XII was a time where Square Enix started experimenting with the ATB system. Unfortunately, 12 doesn't entirely solve the wait issue found in previous entries, but the game makes up for it heavily by introducing a significant level of depth to the combat system. The game plays much like a 2000s tab target MMO. You're tasked with customizing and controlling each of your party members in real-time combat. But as mentioned previously, if you mix deep systems with real-time, you'll often find players that just think your game is overcomplicated. Well, 12 remedies this by introducing the Gambit system. The Gambit system is a highly customizable AI you can program for each of your party members. You can slot in numerous actions with trigger conditions and also assign a priority system. Half the fun is figuring out how to create a well-oiled machine that will mow through enemies, while also allowing you to take manual control at any given time. Instead of micromanaging every detail of combat, you are now more of a battle conductor overseeing the battlefield, giving commands and taking control when necessary. And since you create the AI yourself, there's still a feeling of controlling a party. If you're the full manual kind of person, then the game still lets you do that, but the deep AI configuration is another way to improve ATB-style combat. Lastly, the Final Fantasy XIII series is a compilation of Square's learnings throughout the years, at least as far as combat is concerned. Released in 2009, Final Fantasy XIII has been the best example of what an ATB-style game can be without going into full action territory. For those unfamiliar, Final Fantasy XIII uses an iteration of the ATB system that allows you to stock up multiple actions as the ATB gauge fills. This immediately gives combat a more dynamic feel as characters are frequently doing multiple actions. They also removed all of the pauses and cast timers seen in the previous games that serve to slow down combat, doubling down on the real-time elements. These are good changes that help speed up the flow of combat significantly. However, if that was all that changed, the system would be fairly complex. Switching between party members, choosing the right moves, and timing healing spells would be a major challenge on top of managing enemy weaknesses, aggro, and stagger meters. To reduce the complexity, they did a number of things. First, they limited the number of party members you can control to only the leader, and having the remaining members controlled by AI. Additionally, they added an auto button, which automatically selects moves for you based on your current role. Now, these two things alone make it sound like we're just dumbing down the game, but what brings it all together is the ability to control your party member's role and AI via the paradigm shift. Paradigms are loadouts set prior to battle, and basically allow you to change your character's roles, moves, and behaviors in the middle of combat. So if you need to heal, you can change to a healing paradigm, or if you need to stagger enemies, you can change to a stagger paradigm. This is an integral mechanic the player needs to utilize even if it's not their turn. Meaning while the bar is filling, you're thinking about choosing the right paradigm and you're constantly having to react to the situation on the fly. By segmenting the ATB bar to enable multiple actions, doubling down on real-time combat, and giving access to customizable AI, 13 is able to create an interesting take on the ATB system. But let's say you want to be more involved in combat and less of a conductor. Well, the third game in the trilogy, Lightning Returns, pushes the ATB system further by solely focusing on Lightning, but giving her 3 different jobs she can equip and switch on the fly. She has separate ATB gauges for each job equipped, and each gauge is segmented, allowing multiple actions. When one ATB gauge empties, you can switch to the next job. And since you're only controlling Lightning, the developers were able to add action elements like guarding and perfect parries, which become essential when playing on harder difficulties. This style of gameplay leans more into the action game territory and is both fun and satisfying to play. So in summary, the traditional ATB games we grew up with probably won't be returning in the way that we want them to. The subgenre's core design philosophies try to juggle both real-time and turn-based elements, and ends up giving a lackluster experience of both genres. Pushing turn-based mechanics into a real-time setting causes more confusion for the player rather than creating a fun experience. But on a number of occasions, developers have found clever ways to get the best of both worlds through segmenting ATB gauges, creating interesting and customizable AI, and doubling down on time-based mechanics. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more insights on game design and game development. If you have thoughts to share, be it agree or disagreement, let me know as well. Additionally, you can wishlist Project Bloom on Steam. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.